Well, thanks for revisiting the electric bison on another fine Montana day. I've been given a lot of thought to what our immigration policy should be. First order of business is how to deal with our southern border properly. Right now, it's all about spectacle, making sure that President Trump's base feels that they're getting satisfaction, sticking it to somebody somewhere. I get it. But we really have to have a policy that works and is good for our country. Right now, that policy is very short-sighted, and already the financial community is starting to see the strong indicators that we'll be moving into a recession here shortly because of a lack of labor. I mean, you can have low unemployment for a couple of reasons, and one of them is there's lots of jobs. The other one is there's nobody to work at the jobs. They all went back to Mexico or someplace. Anyhow, we need to have a real comprehensive immigration policy. And one of the good things that'll come from what's happened with the destruction of the policy apparatus of our country under the guise of what Putin convinced Trump was the deep state. One of the good things is when whoever comes back into the next series of governments in our country is going to have the opportunity to put together relevant policies in some key areas, and one of them is immigration. I was watching Steve Bannon. He's a very influential guy in my opinion. He may run for president. Who knows? Against Vance or whoever, and who knows who the Democrat's going to be. But Bannon talks about the possible end of the idea of national boundaries. Well, that's entered my mind too. I mean, it's easy to say that our current constitutional form of government is on the ropes, to say the least. It's certainly being dominated by campaign money to people like Steve Daines. But I'm still hopeful that our Constitution is going to be available for us to live under. And of course, our Constitution has provisions in it to expand to other countries by involving them. And other countries have talked about being accepted by the United States as another state. But what I'm fascinated by is Mexico. That whole attitude that we see along the border by some people really started back in the Mexican War, and that's why one of the reasons I'm taking time to talk about the Mexican War. That's where they started calling us gringos and we started calling them greasers. And guerrilla war had been used by the Spanish and Portuguese against Napoleon's forces in the Peninsular campaigns of the early 1800s already. Guerrilla means small war, but the Mexicans did a pretty good job of also using those tactics. So the rancheros, or what the native communities would call the cholos, the horsemen, the rancheros, the salteadores, that which is Spanish for road agent. Believe it or not, the Spanish had road agents, just like we have and had. They were the ones that kind of conducted the guerrilla war. The elites that formed the officer corps and fought with the Irish on behalf of the Catholic Church at Churubusco, they were always pretty careful about not empowering the Indian communities, which is where the population really was. And the Indian communities were already experiencing having their land taken from them, which is vital to their whole way of life, taken from them by haciendados, large ranchers that felt they had a more pressing need for the land so they could make some serious money, right? And they got to be wealthy, and the Indians got to go without any source of income at all unless they wanted to be tied to what the haciendado was doing, like a slave. But that was going on before even we invaded Mexico in 1846 to 48. And so by the time a guy like Steinbeck wrote his essays and screenplays about Emiliano Zapata, for the screenplay Viva Zapata, Viva Villa, who was the other pretty successful revolutionary leader for the Indians in northern Mexico. Viva Zapata had been a pretty successful film, but Steinbeck was working on Viva Zapata. Viva Villa had been a successful film, and Steinbeck was working on Viva Zapata for a couple of years. And he really studied the sociology of the Indian communities. It's very interesting. And he talked about who Zapata came from. He was a horseman. He was very successful, which made him a poor guy, not acceptable to the haciendados, but free to kind of be more of a leader, him and his brother. So where that's at now, I can't put my finger on it. I'm sure it's more haciendas exist. Maybe there's very few landed Indian communities left, perhaps in far southern New Mexico. But I'm sure the Indians who used to live on the communities are experiencing having their land taken away in a different way by human migration. In this case, it's Mexicans that want to get richer. So I think about all that and what our policy should be in this country, because there's quite a connection between obscenely rich people up in this country. I don't have a problem with people being rich as long as they don't make it a problem for the rest of us. Buying up land, including public lands, so they can do whatever their hearts desire. Them and the Mexicans down in Mexico, like in Monterrey, that split the town so that the wealthy people live in one side and the favelas, the poor areas, are where the former Indian people live. You see the same thing down in Mexico City at Silent Hill, walking by those gated communities. I don't know, it's a thing people do. Once they get their own money, they try to kick the riffraff to the curb. Well, I'm a riffraff kind of guy. This is what we look like. So I've been thinking about what we could have that would be good for our country and help maybe create some opportunity there for the people who have been so far mistreated down in Mexico, just kicked around. And I think instead of, we could have ways of bringing people in, not just by their expertise economically, but by the layer of the society that they're from. Because we'll benefit from all those layers. I've always found that we'll find something that we can benefit from that everyone has to teach. So my thinking is to try to layer the people, not by geography or by expertise, but by layer of society, and start to bring them in that way. That'll certainly kick off a discussion, which probably very few think of it like I do. But that's what I'm thinking. So I was going to talk about the terrible treatment that our soldiers, volunteer and regular, did to the Mexicans that's lost between the lines in the stories of the battles of the war when we invaded Mexico. But I don't know what good comes of that. The Texans, they had been fighting the Mexicans for years during their war for independence, and they wanted to be a slave state. And so a lot of the things that happened caused by the Texas Rangers, heroes that they are, isn't that weird? It comes from that long struggle with the Mexicans. They killed people. There were atrocities. There really were, and there's no excuse for them. Though the Texans did a lot that were legitimate military missions. Same with Ohio. Same with the rack and sackers from Arkansas, Louisiana, volunteers. Yeah, it's not a good story. But I don't know what good will come from that. I don't know what good now would come from that. The Mexicans, the guerrillas, they took their share of, they can take their share of credit for some horrors during that war, on the long, lonely roads between, say, Saltillo and Monterrey. And, our soldiers came to think of the lasso, the thing we see in the rodeo during bulldogging, the lasso, the cowboy's tool. They came to see that as the national weapon of the Mexicans, because if you ever got lassoed by a ranchero or a salteador, you're screwed. You're going to get dragged out across the prairie. You're going to get castrated. You're going to have your tongue cut out. Not good, right? So, just like with every war, it goes both ways. But hopefully, we can learn something from it. And I think starting where Emiliano Zapata left off, and they were in the middle of a big fight when he was suckered into an ambush and killed. And maybe we can avoid the big fight, but maybe find where the current president of Mexico is with her administration, finding peaceful ways to release the pressure that's undoubtedly behind people who just want to live but need a place to do it and a way to do it. And I think if we found a way to have an immigration policy that is more broad-minded than just America, but North America, that'd be a good thing. Anyhow, thanks for visiting the Electric Bison. We'll talk to you later. Bye.